We're going to start with Apple. Analysts at Wedbush warning that the iPhone could face big production troubles ahead, even as manufacturer Foxconn got the green light to reopen two of its Chinese factories today. Josh Lipton is in San Francisco to lay out what's next for the tech giant. Hi, Josh.
So, Courtney, China is a key link in Apple's supply chain, and investors are focused on Foxconn specifically, and for good reason. It is the largest manufacturer of Apple devices. Its factory in Zhengzhou is reportedly back open for business. Only 10% of workers are apparently back. Still, that is important because this plant is described as the most critical iPhone production site. It's located only about 300 miles from the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan. And Reuters now says that another Foxconn plant in Shenzhen is coming back online too, set to resume partial production. But will Apple be able to make enough phones given these challenges to meet demand? You have seen some analysts think the company will ship 10% fewer iPhones than initially projected in Q1. And what does it mean for new products on the way? Could this disrupt plans for that new low-cost phone that was expected next month? It's not just production, though. China is also a key consumer market for the company. Remember, Apple operates 42 stores there. Company's extended store closures, though Apple says that its online store does remain open. Situation remains very fluid, and that's exactly why Apple issued that wider than expected Q2 guidance. Courtney, back to you.
I got a question for you. Josh, can you hear me?
Yep.
So how much inventory do you think they have? How much cushion do they have for this production slowdown?
That's a great question, Karen. I mean, I know that's probably going to depend vendor by vendor. I know the analysts would expect that they have a few weeks. I mean, I think it sort of gets to the broader question, though, is, you know, it's really hard to gauge this for analysts and for investors because you're still trying to decide kind of the length and breadth of this, and therefore how much of an impact it has. I think why it makes it kind of cloudy for investors right now, Karen.
Hey, Josh, it's Tim. So I'm here in 2 weeks roughly of spare capacity. But the question is ultimately pushing out demand is one thing. Is there any sense that there's fear of actually rerouting demand? In other words, this is a temporary hiatus. This certainly is going to affect February. We've done all our modeling. We can see what it means for EPS sensitivities. But does it really do anything for demand?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, that is certainly, you know, you've heard bulls come on CNBC, and so some of that argument is, well, doesn't that kind of just push demand forward? You know, consumers will wait to get their products. I think that's interesting to talk about. Again, you know, what if this goes on for longer than people think? How would that affect Chinese economy? How would that affect disposable income for consumers? You know, it's interesting. Last time Apple reported, had the chance to talk to Tim Cook. We talked in a different way about those AirPods Pro, right? And I asked him, are you afraid if people can't get their hands on your products right away, do they kind of turn to rival products? At that time, he was not concerned about that, said simply, you know, he makes such a materially better product that he's counting on consumers waiting until they can get their hands on it. We'll see.
Josh, thank you very much for running all that through with us. You know, Grasso, when you're thinking about a name like Apple, and Josh brings up a good point, so if you can't get your AirPods right away, maybe you wait. This is, we think, a temporary disruption. We don't know how long temporary is, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like Apple has done a better job of dealing with any disruption when it comes to China. Trade war, now coronavirus.
Well, we're thinking about, to Tim's question, they were thinking about rerouting around the supply chain around China already. So I think this is a double whammy for them. They can't do this. They can't flip a switch, nor can they do it with trade. But I am one of those bulls who thinks that ultimately there's still a demand. Whether it's a demand now or whether it's a demand a month now, from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, you still have over $46 billion in services revenue. People are still going to want the phone. I'm still staying along in the name. I think other people should too.
I think 5 or 6 years ago, this is devastating in terms of what it would have done to the stock, in terms of the China news and the fact that Apple, 5 or 6 years ago was much more dependent on the phone. But the world's changed a lot. Passive investing is now the norm, and I think money continues to flow in. The real concern for me for Apple here is none of this. It's just valuation. And at 21 times next year's numbers, I mean, this is historically at the deep end of the pool for them. The market doesn't seem to care whether it's the broader market or Apple. At some point it does, and that would be my concern.
Karen, you were asking about how much inventory do they have? What's the cushion there? What if they close the factories again? They could go back to work and say, never mind. Right. I feel like it feels early to send the workers back.
Well, it said only 10% of them have come back, so
true.
I don't know how much capacity, how much production they can do. They're a little lucky on timing. This quarter and next quarter are the the lowest earning quarters of Apple. So that's a little lucky. But I got to say, it's 1% and change off its all-time high. As a holder, I'm a little bit nervous about that. I think it's a little bit stretched.
Yeah, I mean, the stock has, look, to be clear, the stock's done nothing. I mean, think about the earnings they had. Think about the opportunity for this stock to run into weakness regardless. And I know Carter's going to talk about mega cap tech, so that's going to be exciting. Stay tuned for that. Having said all that, Apple's certainly leader of the pack. We've done the numbers. We keep doing this, up 90% from June. And yet you throw coronavirus at it, it's sideways. So they had a 2-week buffer going into the Lunar New Year for suppliers. And beyond that is where you start to wonder what it means for demand. I don't know why demand changes based upon a delay.
But what I think is important is the conversation that Guy brings up around multiple expansion. I think you're having the same story with regard to Disney. So when you're looking at a company that used to be hardware dependent and now you're having the services arm of it, I think analysts are having a tough time trying to figure out what that new multiple should be. And I think that's why it's gone sideways. And that's why it's up 10% year to date.
Guy, what do you think about some of the suppliers, though? So if, let's say Apple gets back online, even if it's 10%, what about everybody else? They can't make the phones without all the parts.
Yeah, and that's been one of the problems. But, some of these names, you look at if you want to play the 5G, which I think is that's what's embedded in this Apple bull story. I mean, a name like Xilinx, which has been under pressure considerably, I'd rather try to buy that looking for the rebound in that name than try to play some of these other tech stocks that have just been parabolic to the upside. For example, like a Micron or an AMD or even a Texas Instruments for that matter.
Yeah, and if you look at the semis overall as a group, that's a chart actually that looks a little bit more vulnerable. And remember, when we were talking trade war, we were talking all the things that really should have derailed semis last year. Semis significantly outperformed. So I do think that that's a case where both some seasonality could be something that's putting a little bit more fear on the chips. And in fact, I think the chart looks a little bit different here, at least in the short run. It's hard to say that anything looks too bad, all things considered.
Karen, you said you were a little nervous about your current position. That mean you're just sitting? You're not making any moves?
I'm just sitting. I probably look to sell some upside calls, but I'm not going to sell it because my general view on coronavirus is that most investors will look through, and a lot of companies will get a free pass on a weak first quarter and maybe even a weak second quarter. And as I said, those are the two lowest quarters for Apple, and really it is the 5G story, as Guy said. So we're not going to see that till later in the year anyway. So I am hanging on.
That is a very good point about the free pass. Maybe you should toss some other things in there for
Could
some
always
of
a
these
free
companies.
pass.
It's going to be a little harder for us to figure out.